Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for a breakfast chat, and today we're having, you guys guessed it, bison, rice, eggs, and cranberry juice. Alright, today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that comes up all the time when people start talking about strength. And a lot of times people say, well, the big three are not the final test of strength. And while I agree with that, they are still, especially when you look at them closely, are an extremely good metric of a person's overall strength. There's a reason they have been selected and standardized. And I'm not saying they aren't somewhat arbitrary, because they are somewhat arbitrary lifts with a somewhat arbitrary range of motion. But when people say silly stuff like, well, they're all really just about leverages, and no, that only matters for relative strength. Okay? What do I mean there? Pound for pound strength, they matter a lot on leverages. But realistically, when you start getting towards heavier body weights, they don't. They don't at all. I mean, case in point, look at, again, Thor's deadlift. Strongest deadlift in the world, and he has terrible leverages for deadlifting. For all purposes, he has some of the worst leverages you could possibly have for deadlifting. He has a terrible pound for pound deadlift, but he's still the strongest deadlifter in the entire world. That makes sense? Do people hopefully understand that? What do we mean by leverages? People who move a weight a shorter distance have a leverage advantage. That's it. That's what we mean. When people say the word leverages, that person has great leverages for that lift, they mean that they're built to move that weight half the distance that someone else does. Okay, that's it. That's all that it means. So why then are they a good test of strength, and why do some people claim they are? And we're going to get to that latter in a minute, because there's interesting reasons why people try to claim that. And it's usually because they are really weak. They are really weak, or they're only good at a couple of lifts, right? Maybe a third of their body is really strong. Because they train lazy and they're weak. Which, by the way, I will point out that people who are really jacked big bodybuilders tend to be really strong if they do any actual maxes. If they practice maxing on anything, they tend to get real strong because they're fully developed. And you're weak in areas because you're underdeveloped. And if you're underdeveloped in areas, because you're lazy. Okay, you're not training it. So let's come over and let's talk about why the big three are a very good test of strength when combined together. And I'm not saying just a single lift. Your strength compared to another person is never based upon just one lift. Okay, if we're looking at how strong you are overall, you need several. And the interesting thing with these three, all three of them are a full body movement, but it gets balanced out in the end. What do we mean? Okay, the bench press uses leg drive. A good bench presser, someone who is really, really good, like an elite level bench presser, tends to be really good at using leg drive. And I'm not saying that person can't just flat backed with, without leg drive or anything, can't lift a lot of weight. They usually really can. But the best learn how to make it a full body movement. So we're still coming back to strength. You're learning to use your legs to help drive the bench is a sign that you're strong. You have good body awareness. You know how to drive with your entire body on anything you do. That is part of what strength means. Okay? But it is a very upper body dominant lift. And people who tend to have very jacked upper bodies, especially if they have short arms, are going to be good at the bench press even if they don't have those techniques. So there's a leverage difference there, and people have a leverage advantage on the deadlift or the bench press if they have really short arms. And we'll come to that on the other lifts, so why it balances out. That's why the big three matter. Okay, but it's very upper body dominant with a little bit of lower body, right? A little bit of lower body. It's very biased towards people with shorter arms. Let's come over to the squat. The squat is really a test of overall muscle, particularly in the lower body. Look at the data, the studies that have come out in the last few years looking at taking the ability to DEXA scan someone, plug in their height, and calculate their back squat within 10% margin of error. There's formulas and a bunch of researchers, and I'm talking everyone from Schoenfeld to Knuckles and all these people, all collaborated data together. They created a big study. They found that with the squat, they could estimate your max squat from a DEXA scan. They came up with a formula. And no, I don't have the exact formula because it's somewhat complex. But they found with 100% consistency, they could DEXA scan any lifter, whether they're a power lifter, bodybuilder, anyone else, take their lean muscle tissue through their lower body, through their whole body really, and adjust it for height, and they could get within 10%, because that other 10% comes down to genetics, training style, do you max out, all that, right? But 90% of it was purely about muscle tissue relative to height. And it gave them a perfect formula. But really it is a test of low body strength with some emphasis on the upper body. Because if you have a really weak upper body, you're still not going to be able to squat. If your back, upper back, middle back, all that is weak, this is part of the upper body, your squat's going to suck, no matter how strong your legs are. But just like the bench press is mostly upper body, the squat is mostly a test of lower body. With shorter people, shorter legged people having an advantage pound for pound on the leverages. Okay? But there are some tall guys out there who squat 800 to 900 pounds. They exist. Then we come over to the deadlift, because already we've got this balance here, but so far our balance is towards shorter arm people. Then we have the deadlift. The deadlift is an even mix of upper and lower body. Okay? Now it's mostly posterior side, but again we've got the bench press for the anterior side on the front. And the squat, while we'll argue that a good power squat uses a ton of posterior chain and a ton of hips and everything, the quads are still a primary mover. The deadlift, conversely, measures the strength through the back half of the body with an even mix top to bottom. In other words, if you have a weak back, even upper or middle back, it will limit your deadlift, and it will limit the amount you can lift. If you have weak hamstrings, weak glutes, you're going to have bad deadlift. It biases towards people with longer arms. That biases towards people with longer arms. You see where we're going here? When you combine these three together, the three together, when they're added up, remove the leverage advantage from one versus the other. People who have extreme leverages at one tend to be bad at another. Right? And even then, people will argue, well, legs, but that's only matters as far as weight class. But taller people tend to go into heavier weight classes, and they tend to be stronger overall. So even then, that's biased towards weight classes, not necessarily your overall total. So it all balances out, right? When you combine the three together, it gives you a very, very good approximation of a person's total strength through their entire body, okay? Gives you a very, very good idea. It's a good measure. So why do some people claim? Well, it's not. Number one, to be trendy. Number two, because they're weak. They're weak. And you know what? I could make that claim because I am not built for the bench. I have some of the worst leverages imaginable for the bench. Bench is very hard for me. I have to fight for every pound. I don't have an elite bench. My squat and deadlift for my weight and age would be classified as elite. Absolutely. The bench is a long way under it. It's a long way under it. I could put another 10% on my bench and it wouldn't be elite. Okay? I could claim bench isn't a good test of strength, but I know better. That would be dishonest. I have to work really hard at it, and that sucks, but it is what it is. I accept it. Still a good test of strength when it's mixed into the whole equation. By itself, it isn't. By itself, it just means you probably have short arms and big pecs, okay? But when we calculate it in together, it is a balancing counterpoint, particularly against something like the deadlift. Okay, it balances everything out. It removes leverages, advantages, and disadvantages when you combine these three together. So the people who are claiming they're not, when we take the trendy part aside, are usually people who are just very weak. And maybe they're not really weak, but they're weak compared to people who are actually strong, right? And they don't want to be judged against standardized lifts that balance out your overall strength, because these are standardized lifts which people have learned to master, and they've learned to find their leverage. And people will say, well, we're individual. Well, no. Finding your leverages isn't cheating. That's just finding the way that you can get the most weight moved. But the thing is, when we're comparing them, even to something like powerlifting, we allow a wide variety of grip widths on the bench. We allow a wide variety of stances on the squat, and then we have conventional versus sumo, and there's a lot of variation in that. You're allowed to find your individual leverages, and that's not cheating. That's just saying, hey, what foot and hand position lets me lift the most weight with the strength I have? That should be common sense. That would be like saying, it's cheating in football for someone to figure out the correct angle to throw the football or to throw a baseball. Oh, they're cheating because they found their good angle for throwing it. That's silly. That's silly. Of course they are. Or do you want to be competitive or not? But these are people who are weak, and they don't want to be compared to other people to be shown how weak they are. Especially when you combine multiple lifts together that balance things out to where any leverage advantage they might have for that one lift they're good at gets thrown out the window, and they don't want to be compared to other people and let people know that they're weak. And this includes some coaches, this includes some fitness professionals, and they're the ones who promote this. And I'm not going to name names, but you can read their articles. They're weak. They don't know how to train. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.